Number one, the brand is not your trademark registration. Your brand is not your logo, and your brand is not the product. Your brand is what do consumers think of you after they've seen the ads, they've bought the product, they're wearing the product. What do they think of you then? There's so many elements of every business that it all comes back to how does a customer feel after they've got your product? It didn't matter how many mistakes I made in my business. I made so many mistakes in the business. The product itself was good enough to sort of carry me through all of those blunders until I got it right and fixed it. So I was very lucky in having a fantastic product that I could back up.
In reading your book, you took me through a very familiar emotional journey.
Right.
What was it like early on? What did it feel like for you?
Well, it was frustrating because 1 in 2 Australians own some sort of sheepskin footwear. So I thought when I discovered there was no sheepskin in America, I thought I'd be an instant millionaire, which most entrepreneurs do when they have that first aha, And I imported some samples, and we just got shut out of the footwear industry. All the shoe stores didn't get it, and it was a surf market that was interestingly. So many surfers from California had been down to Australia on their surf trips, and they bought 4 or 5 pairs of boots back for their buddies. And when I started approaching the surf shops initially, just with the samples, it was, oh my God, you're going to make a fortune. Everybody I know owns a pair of Ugg boots, and so that sort of got me started. I raised some money. We, bought in 500 pairs. And when we went finally back to the surf shops to actually get an order, that's when we got that, oh, well, fantastic, Brian, you're going to make a fortune, but we couldn't sell them in our store because we just sell surfboards, And that lack of awareness of what sheepskin boots are like was very, very difficult. My first year's sales was 28 pairs, which was a horrible, realization after we just bought 500 pairs in. And it took a long time, 3 or 4 years, before I finally figured out what I was doing wrong with marketing this product and getting to where it started to have the semblance of some small business.
Yeah, and you started, this was late 70s.
79, yeah.
Yeah, got this venture started.
Yeah.
And it's always amazing to me how virtually every very successful company had quite a few years up front where it was incredibly challenging.
Yeah. In fact, I wrote this book called The Birth of a Brand. And the theme of it is that you can't give birth to adults. Every business you see on the stock exchange page of the New York Times started with like the equivalent of 28 pairs, which happened to be $1,000, right? Because every business starts with the aha of the founder. Oh my God, I'm going to make a fortune. This is the best thing in the world. And you take action. And, the birth of Ugg was buying 6 pairs of samples from Australia. And then the idea just lies there, and it lies there, and there's no amount of feeding or jiggling the cradle or urging. An infant can't get up and go to college. It has to be an infant. And eventually, if you don't give up, because most entrepreneurs give up after a year when they see nothing happening. But if you can hang in through that phase and you really believe in your product, then you'll start to hit the infancy, or the toddling stage, where the first true believers are talking about your product and magazines are writing articles about you. And that's a pretty cool phase. And eventually that goes into the youth, which to me is the best phase of every business, because you have consistent orders coming in, administration's working, the warehouse and shipping is working, and Salesforce is doing great. And you can run a $20, $30 million company in that youth phase. But if it's a really great product or service, you're going to hit the teenage years, and you can recall as a teenager, you wanted to be at every party in town on a Saturday night. It's exactly the same in business. You want to be in every major trade show and you want to be in every mass retailer. And it's extremely dangerous because you can outstrip your capacity to finance that growth so fast. And I almost lost it a couple of times in that teenage phase. But eventually you figure things out with the accountants and you put the controls in and you become a mature company. So every business and every venture pretty much takes on that same pattern. One interesting thing that your listeners might like is that at the time I started UGG, there was this company up in Oregon importing these nylon shoes called Blue Ribbon shoes. They eventually changed their name to Nike, but they started just a little bit before me, and I saw them floundering for years and years and years trying to get into the running market. And then when the sport of jogging took off, which was completely outside of Nike's ability to control, jogging happened and everyone starts going, where are the best shoes? And they eventually settled on Nike, and they went into the millions and the hundreds of millions and the billions. But the interesting fact is that when I read Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, who was the founder of Nike, the first 5 years sales of UGG was greater than the first 5 years sales of Nike. So it just highlights the fact that you just cannot give birth to adults. Every business goes through it.
Yeah. I loved reading your book, The Birth of a Brand, to get ready for this conversation. And, the metaphor in there, what's the best way to have a frog that's the best, the most.
Oh, yeah.
It's got to be a tadpole as long as it needs to be a tadpole, right?
Yeah. The quote is, the quickest way for a tadpole to become a frog is to live every day happily as a tadpole. And I did it. Nike did it. Reebok did it. All of these big companies just floundered for 5 or 6 years before they figured out what was the element that would pick them up and, get true believers.
Yeah. And what I was getting out of that is every stage is wildly important, and we need to be present with it to figure out what we need to figure out at that stage. Right.
Yeah. 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 In fact, I've been speaking ever since I wrote the book in 2014, and I redid it in 2022 as an audio book. And I thought, this is my chance to fix it and update it and put in new stuff and take out all stuff. And I literally did not change a single word. The book is it just seems to be timeless. It's a roadmap for entrepreneurs, but that led to a speaking career where I speak all over the world to entrepreneurs. But my messaging is changing now, because as I'm getting older, as we all do, unfortunately, I've really come to appreciate the fact that it's not the goal that we should all be chasing. It's the process, right? And the most valuable thing out of everything that I've done is the journey. And in fact, I've given a new talk twice now, and I'm going to expand on it and make it into one of my best keynotes, which it's not about the goal, it's about the journey.
Yeah. And each stage of the business, as you go through it, the conception, birth, infancy, toddler years, youth, adulthood,
yep.
Enjoy that, right? I mean, how fun to be working with the team and and the only way to make it through it is I think, to figure out things you don't have the answers to, but going into it with the team you have, you'll be able to figure it out.
That's right. Yeah. And looking back, I spent years in my 20s. I wanted to play international rugby, and I trained for over 10 years, and I was just in my early 30s, and I ended up playing rugby against the New Zealand All Blacks, which is like a religion down there. And I played against England. And, after I came off the field in both those games, I thought, God, is that all there is? That's it after all that work. And I was a really good catamaran, little small catamaran sailor. And I got second in the Australian Championships. And after that was done, it was like, God, is that all? And it's made me reflect now that the fun was in all of the partying we did on the way to try to be a big top rugby player, and the pleasure of being out on the water. I've had some just absolute fantastic memories of all of that. And when I look back in my business careers, UGG was like the first big success I had. And my fondness is from all of the early days. I didn't really get that much enjoyment out of it when it was up to 10, 15 million, because it was like a business that you had to sort of, and people are hard to sort of, corral. And it was the early days of the struggles and the unknown and the chaos and the financial hardships. And I look at getting, just winning the battle of all of those things. That was the real fun in building the UGG brand.
Yeah, that's incredible. I talked to a friend of mine this morning, and I asked her, because I read your book over the last few days, and I said, do you know about UGG boots? And she looks at me and goes, well, you need to tell me more before I answer. And so, what do you mean? She goes, well, every 13-year-old girl on the planet, for the most part, has to have those, and they go through the phase. And I asked her, did you go through the phase? She goes, oh yeah.
Yeah.
So what an amazing brand that you built there. One question I have, so I go back to my journey. I built something early on that was a pretty successful aerospace company.
Okay.
3 employees to 500 employees.
Wow.
We had 2,000 customers in 60 countries.
Wow. That's huge.
80 hours a week in the early days,
Yep.
Almost going out of business 15 times a year the first 3 years straight.
That's normal.
And it totally normal. And one of the questions, I have is, had you had a bunch of money to start out with, what would that have changed? Because for me, I think it could have completely screwed me up.
Oh, if I had $5 million to start, I would have blown 4,900,000 of it for no effect. And I'll tell you why. Americans didn't understand sheepskin, right? So I was advertising with these models on the beach, the perfect hair and clothing, and the UGG boots were the main part of the ad, And I did this 3 years in a row, and getting nowhere. The sales were like 6,000 the first year, and then 12 or 14,000 in the next year, and 20,000. And it should have been way more, because I was spending quite a bit of money. And I'm talking, maybe $20,000, $30,000 a year on advertising. Had I had $5 million, I would have blown $4.5 million in advertising, not realizing this. When I almost wanted to give up the business, but I decided I'll give it one more try. And I went and had a beer with one of my surf shop retailers. And I said, Rob, I don't seem to be getting any traction in the market. And he just said, oh, shut up, Brian. And he calls out the back to all these, maybe a half a dozen 12, 13-year-old kids who store their surfboards in the shop. And he says, what do you guys think of Uggs? And every one of them just went, oh, man, those Uggs, they're so fake. Have you ever seen those ads? Those models, they can't surf, right? So what I was doing was sending the wrong message to my target market. And when I saw my ads through their eyes, I just saw how fake they were, and it was almost embarrassing. And I wasn't building my brand. I was killing my brand by doing that advertising, right? So I switched gears, and I called up a buddy who was running a Scholastic surf team in Orange County. And I said, Pete, do you have any young kids who are going to turn pro soon? Because I need to sponsor someone, and he gave me 2 guys, Mike Parsons and Ted Robinson. And I just took my little Canon Sure Shot. We went surfing at Black's Beach down in La Jolla in San Diego, and Trestles up in San Clemente. And these walks are a mile to get to the water. Always fantastic surf when you get there, and a mile back. And so I just took a couple of those shots from walking to and from those beaches, and I ran those ads in Surfer Magazine, and the sales went to 200,000, like not even trying, right? And that's when I realized what advertising and marketing should be. You need to, like, my thought was every little kid who reads Surfer magazine would just be dying to walk down the path to Trestles with Mike and Ted, or Black's Beach. And that became, it was so cool to have a pair of Ugg boots from then on. Now, I'd wasted 3 or 4 years of money and time and getting nowhere by giving everybody the wrong impression. And the minute I created this cool image, if you didn't have a pair of Ugg boots at Malibu High or, Costa Mesa or, you just weren't one of the cool kids at school. And the moms, at Christmas time was, hey, Mom, I want a pair of Uggs for Christmas. All the cool kids have got them. And so this trend began. And then that transferred the girl, the mums would be in the shop. So my daughter would like these too, so it sort of spawned this absolute passion. And it started in Southern California with the surf market, but I expanded that to the snowboarding and ski market. And then, it took a couple of years, maybe another 3 years, because I couldn't figure out what happens in the Midwest. And I was in a sporting goods store back in Cincinnati one time. And I said, well, what do the kids do for in the winter time for sport? And they go, well, they play hockey. Well, for an Australian, we've never heard of hockey, right? It turns out that market's bigger than surfing. And so we started advertising to the youth hockey players. And so by getting this peer pressure working in the young teens, was the mums couldn't withstand the pressure. They just had to buy the boots because it shut the kids up, And that's really what built this passionate feeling about the Ugg brand.
Yeah. And how many years approximately before you were consistently profitable?
Probably in the 7th year, we started to make our first profit.
Okay.
Horrible, isn't it?
Well, that was the magic for me too. It was about 7 years in my aerospace direction.
And I think if you looked at any big company, that would be pretty par for the course. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the question around risk. So you're building a family, you get married through this process, you have a daughter and then a second daughter.
Yeah.
What was it about you that said, I'm going to keep doing this? And I've got a family and all this responsibility, but you did it anyway and it worked out, whereas most people would give up and not think go get something more stable.
I had one really, really lucky thought, and that was 1 in 2 Australians own some sort of sheepskin footwear. So it's not the product. It must be me, right? And so even in the worst of times, when I was trying to put payroll on my credit card, going to the bank and getting a draw on my credit cards to pay the staff for the week, things like that, I just had the faith that, everybody in Australia wears them. It's got to be me. I've got to figure out a way around that. So that was a sort of a lucky thing that I did have in my back pocket that a lot of entrepreneurs may not if they're starting a completely new venture.
Well, that's, I think most, even if they did have that idea, it's pretty scary, to stick with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Brand. So in reading the book, you did a lot to protect the brand. You saw the value of a lot of the folks that were on the journey with you didn't really see the value and wanted to make other decisions. Talk about brand a little bit. You open my eyes even further. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Well, number one, the brand is not your trademark registration, right? Your brand is not your logo, and your brand is not the product, right? Your brand is what do consumers think of you, right? After they've seen the ads, they've bought the product, they're wearing the product. What do they think of you then? And if there's so many elements of every business that it all comes back to how does a customer feel after they've got your product? Because if you can, like I did, I followed up, I I never sold a surf shop that I didn't go in and try and help be profitable. I made friends with all of my retail customers and, the owners of the shops. And if ever they had a problem, I fixed it, right? Now, that may not be product related, it's service related, but nevertheless, by being responsive to my retailers first, they then passed that on subliminally to their customers, and they looked after their customers. And, I used to take back product that was not defective, but the owner had sort of put their foot up against the fireplace at a campfire and the sole melted, I would just replace them, and the store owners knew that I would always back the store owners. So that level of service and combined with the fact that sheepskin is just so sensual when you put it on with bare feet, those two elements, it didn't matter how many mistakes I made in my business. I made so many mistakes in the business. The product itself was good enough to sort of carry me through all of those blunders until I got it right and fixed it. So I was very lucky in having a fantastic product that I could back up.
I'm kind of blown away that I missed the whole thing. I don't have a pair of Ugg boots, but I'm going to get a pair for this upcoming ski season for sure. So I'm going to do that. When you talk about making mistakes, the book was kind of riddled with, and I love the format of sidebar and these life lessons, journey lessons, really.
Right.
So many good nuggets in there. And I recommend that all the listeners pick up a copy of The Birth of a Brand, an incredible, incredible book. What are a couple of the bigger mistakes that you made and kind of had to work through early on?
Even though I was an accountant for 10 years and graduated as a CPA in American terms, I never understood finance. So and when you're growing a product-based business, the biggest enemy is your success, because it requires more product. And it was okay when we were doing $1 million a year, we could get credit for the factories, but when it got up to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 million, I didn't have the ability to forecast. And, this is back before support groups like YPO and EO and all these company or these organizations that have your peers help you through it. I didn't have anybody to turn to, so I kept struggling with go from 2 to 4 million in sales. How the hell do I finance the production? And the banks were saying, it's a fad. You'll never, it won't be here in 2 years. And so I couldn't get bank financing. So I was always vulnerable to having to raise private investment money, and that brings with it a lot of, pressure from the investors, because, let's say they came in at $4 million and now we're looking at $6 million in sales the next year, and you need another $1 million worth of product and they don't have it. So, there's all these issues with financing the product. But each time I would have to use, I'd get the bigger investor in and they didn't want the old investor. So I'd have to do a deal to buy them out, and then we'd forward again. And this happened several times. And what I learned, a little bit in retrospect, was that another piece of philosophy, because my book's full of philosophy and spirituality, right? But this lesson was that nearly always your most disappointing disappointments become your greatest blessings. And every time I got caught in one of those horrible situations and I'd come through it, it was like the business just didn't keep growing this way. It jumped and went to a whole new plateau. So, business doesn't go from here to the top line. You cruise along, hit a wall, hit some obstacle, and it can be money, it can be people, it can be production. And you have to figure out a way around or over it. And if you get over that, you cruise along until you hit the next wall, and it goes. And so it's just a series of continual solutions that you have to find every time you hit that obstacle. And always, like I ask from the stage, raise your hand if in the last 6 months you had some disaster happen in your personal life or your business life that at the time was a disaster, and now you look back and think, thank God that happened. And every time 80% of the audience puts their hands up. So it's just one of those beautiful things that you learn as we mature.
Yeah. I've really learned to value the struggle, because every time it's hard, especially when it's really hard, it's been better coming out the other side.
Yeah.
And so go ahead.
The good news is that every time you overcome one of those obstacles and your competitors don't, you gain market share, you gain more credibility, you gain more impetus in the future marketing. So yeah, every failure has within it that, the seeds of a whole new level of growth.
Yeah. And I like the way you describe, it's not steady growth over time. It's a series of plateaus.
Yeah.
You figure something out, you jump up, and then you're at that level because there's something else to figure out. Then you figure it out.
There's always another thing. Yeah.
Yeah. In the business philosophy, in the book, you talk about being true to oneself, intuition, and then partnership with the universe.
Yeah.
I feel, so I'm a musician. I'm sitting in my home music studio right now. We were talking about before we got started. And the older I get, the more I feel connected to the source. It's the only way I can describe it. The stuff that comes in, I didn't come up with it. It's just there.
Yeah.
Talk about your business philosophy. I love those three things.
Yeah, well, in my book and also in my talks, I talk about all the goosebump moments, that when I was, I'd quit being an accountant and I heard Pink Floyd's Time song, which is, no one told you when to run, you missed the starting gun. And like, that was a goosebump moment. And I realized, shit, I got to do something. And then I'd started meditating because I bought a book on yoga, 1977, right? This is way before yoga became popular. And it led me into meditation because I was doing all these exercises and breathing really heavily and just getting into meditation. And I realized all the big trends are coming out of California. That was another goosebump moment. And I arrived in California and I was looking around for a business to bring back to Australia for 4 or 5 months. And one day I was surfing at Malibu. It was October. The wind had got cold and the water was chilly. And I was pulling on my Ugg boots that I brought from Australia. And I got goosebumps again. Oh my God, there's no sheepskin boots in America, So this series of goosebumps, I've always been amazed at what the hell do they mean, and I've figured it out for my satisfaction that there's, God's not out at the end of the universe somewhere. There's a fragment of God in every single one of us. There's some spiritual connection in us with the bigger universe and the bigger picture, which we'll just call God, right? And I started starting with the goosebumps, it was like every time I'd get goosebumps, I go, what did I just think? Who did I just deal with? And there was always some major sort of change in direction, which was a positive change. And so I've come to feel that this fragment of God in us has its own desire for it. It knows what it wants us to do in this life. And every time we tune in to and make a decision based on that inner knowing, it sends me a message, which is, I can't hear it spiritually. I'm not that connected, but it comes through the electrochemical system, which is our body, and it comes out as goosebumps. So I challenge everybody to, next time you get the goosebumps, just stop for a second and think, well, what did I just do? And I'll bet you there'll be something meaningful behind that realization.
Yeah. So being true to oneself and intuition, there's a big part of that there that you're talking about.
Yeah. The intuition is that spirit communion going on within you. And it's like a knowing. And I've just learned to trust it. And, I've pretty much always been right when I followed that guide. And I have suffered the consequences when I didn't follow that intuition. So it goes both ways.
Well, and it's helpful for the numbers to kind of work out, because having a seasonal business like you had with 20% gross margins, hard to make the math work no matter how much the sales increase.
Yeah, and it took me 7 or 8 years to figure that out. In fact, it was when a new investor came in and we were going over, profitability, and we were doing 5 or 6 million in sales and no profit. And that's when we started to look at the margins and the cost of holding the warehouse, for 12 months instead of just the 4 or 5 where we really shipped a lot of product. And this guy came up with a classic term. He says, Brian, this is just profitless prosperity. It doesn't matter how big your sales are if you don't make a profit, So that profitless prosperity was a sort of a thing it was a masthead of our planning every year.
Yeah. Well, you certainly made a lot of happy feet around the world. So you had that going on. You're creating a lot of value there. I like the way you describe in the book that, there were some, I don't know what you call them, bad or selfish actors along the way.
Yeah.
And rather than getting frustrated with them, there were 2 things that jumped out at me. You said you're going to take it as one more just incredible lesson on the journey. And then you're going to choose love rather than getting frustrated with them and carrying that around with you. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, people is the hardest part of any business. And especially if they come in with the money, right? Because they've got their own agenda. You see, as an entrepreneur, you see the 10-year, 15, 20-year goal that you're working towards. And many times the investors see a 2-year investment that they're going to double their money and they want out. So there's always going to be a conflict between those two schools of thought. And I had my share of people with not the actual investors, but they brought in staff to look over me really, to invest, protect their investments. And those were the people who never really understood the product or the business or the future. They were just in there like hatchet guys, And so I had many of those, not many, like 3 or 4 in the 19 years that I owned the company. And 2 things. One during the periods where the opposition was the worst, and I was thinking that, God, these guys are going to crash the company if I don't, get control of that. And most people lose sleep and worry and everything, which I did. But I came up with this mantra that was fantastic, which was, there are 2 extremes. There's fear and there's love, right, on the planet. And you got to choose which way you're going to, and there's all gradations in between, but you got to choose where do you go. So I came up with this little trick that every night, I'd wake up at 2 in the morning and my body would be tense and all I could see was these unanswerable, conundrums with how do I save the business? How do I save the business? And what I came up with was this mantra that I would just say, I choose love. I choose love. I choose love. And I would say this 2, 3, 4 minutes at 2 o'clock in the morning. And what would happen is my physiology would change. I would start to relax. My neck would release. I would start to relax, and then I'd go to sleep, right? And then the next morning you pick up, but now you're in the reality world, not the fear, of all these horrific things that can happen. So that was a very, very big part of my mantra. And I had another one that I've just sort of forgotten for the moment, but I'm sure I'll come back in a second.
Yeah. And it sounds like your wife was incredibly supportive and powerful when it came to not letting you go to the fear or self-doubt.
Yeah. There was one item, instance, I should say, in particular, and this is in my book. It's quite, and I use this on the stage, very, very powerful, because I had actually signed a new investor on where we were going to, there were 4 of us. We were going to share the, proceeds 25% each, but I didn't get my 25% stock issued until I finished this little trademark lawsuit that I was in, which I knew I was going to win. So we went ahead, signed up the deal, and I was going to be a salesman 100%. They were going to run all the back office and, the warehouse and all that, do the shipping. And when I went out on the road the first time after this new deal, one of my retailers said, "Hey, Brian, I heard you sold the business." And I went, "What?" He said, yeah, I called an order in this morning and they said you don't own it anymore. And I was just like, what? They told you that? And I called up the office, from the gas station next door, because this is before cell phones, and I said, "What are you telling people? I don't own the company." He said, "Well, you don't. You don't have your 25% of stock yet." And I said, "Yes, I do. You're my 3 new partners. We all own it equally." And and I went back home and I looked up the contract, and literally, in legal terms, I wasn't an owner until I got my stock, and I went into this humongous depression. For 3 days, I didn't leave my house. I couldn't speak to anyone. I didn't take a phone call. I didn't make a phone call. My brain was like just stopped dead, because I'd seen myself as CEO of this huge shoe company one day, and now I didn't even own it. And it was like the 4th night, my wife and I were watching TV. I was lying on my back on the living room floor. She was on the couch, and the show finished. I clicked off the TV and I rolled over onto my stomach and got up on my hands and knees and started crawling towards the bedroom. And my wife, who's really a quiet person, she just looked at me and goes, "You get up now and walk to bed like a man," and she scared the crap out of me, But the shock of it was like, I stood up, and as I came off the floor, it was like coming out of a fog. And I thought, oh God, there's so much more to life than this crappy little sheepskin company. And the next day I was back to Brian, Mr. Positive again, thinking, okay, well, what am I going to do with my life? And I thought, real estate, no. Business broker, maybe. Accountant, never. And then I just got this one of the biggest doses of goosebumps I've ever had. And I thought, oh my God, sales. I've come to love sales. And I thought, well, what can I sell? And that's when the goosebumps hit. And I thought, well, shit, Ugg boots, I love the product. I love how people feel about them. And so I ate humble pie, and I called up the guys at Anaheim, my new partners, and said, look, I may never own the company, but I'm going to go on the road, and I'm going to get a pair of Ugg boots on every single person in America, And so I went back up and, was out there a month, with just selling to all my customers, and got back, and Neil handed me a check for $5,000. So that's your commissions. And that was literally the first real money I pulled out of the business. That was about 6 years, And I got back after the next month, and a check for $10,000, and the next month another check for $10,000. And that was when I realized that, nearly always your greatest, disasters become your greatest blessings, because I was making a shitload of money. I was having fun with all my retailers. We'd surf or play golf, or, working wasn't work anymore. Working was the pleasure of being with all these customers and potential customers. And so, yeah, that little kick in the pants from my wife was absolutely critical at the time.
Yeah, how incredible. And the right support at the right time.
Yeah.
Company culture, super important to me. I mean, the simplest way I think about it, it's what we agreed to do, how things get done, and what it feels like to work there. And you described at one point, after going through rounds of investors, and they bring their people in to where closed door meetings were starting to happen, where you were very open. And you said, wait a minute, I'm just going to go sell and let them do that. But that eventually blew up anyway.
Yeah.
And so some interesting lessons you must have learned there around culture and getting all that stuff right. Talk about that. Yeah.
You've just hit the point that I forgot earlier. Because these types of people so debilitating. And you get people in the company where it's more, in their mind, it's more, how do I chisel my way up to the top and kill off that person who's in my way, and they crawl their way to the top, and they don't have the interests of the company at heart. They have their own personal interests at heart. And that was really, really hard for me to grapple with mentally, because I'm all about the team and the openness, and we share everything equally. Nobody's going to get, fired from, saying something I don't want to hear, that sort of thing. But you do get these people in the company that are horribly destructive. And I carried that burden for a long, long time. And then I finally, and this is, I'm talking after I sold the company, I would still wake up at night just going, how the hell did that happen? And finally, I just realized that, without them, I would not have learned the lessons on how to out survive them. Right. And so I started to mellow my tone that, they were doing what they thought was right for them. It wasn't right for the company, but I'm not going to let them have any power over me anymore. I forgive you. And I developed this really weird thing where I would pretend I had this huge balloon. I was up on a stage, and all these people are down in the audience, and I'd bring them up one at a time, and I'd blow up this balloon, and I'd somehow get them inside it, and I'd tie the knot, and I'd float the balloon out the window, right? And you cannot believe the relief that my mind would get from just accepting them. I don't like you. I forgive you. I love you. Now out you go. And I developed that so efficiently that when I started to get these worries at night, in the middle of the night, I would instantaneously just get back on the stage and blow up another balloon. And I could get rid of that anxious tension that comes from and it's mostly from the inexplicable, where you don't even understand how these people can think that way, right? Just get them out the window. And it's amazing how, I have this little fantasy, because I believe that our spirit goes on to another level, right? I almost can't wait to see some of these guys in the next level and say, hey, thanks for coming down and just being such a prick, because I learned so much from you, especially on how to love you, right? And I really hope that I'm correct in being able to visit these people sometime, because they really, after I'd get burned from the next one, I would just have this attitude, go, God damn it, I can't wait to meet the next one, because they're going to have to be really, really good to get me after that last prick, And so it was an amazing release for me to love these people. I don't like them, hate them in a lot of ways, but I still love them as who they are for their life. But you're not part of my life. Get out of it.
Yeah. And I try to accept and understand. And what used to really get me frustrated now is like, well, wait a minute. They're trying to win in their way, in their life.
Yeah, that's right.
But I try to accept and understand. And there's such valuable lessons to help me navigate forward and see it faster when it's coming in. Yeah. But it's interesting how folks from different organizational environments, like a small business, human nature is the same. So it creates a certain kind of behavior on average. In a large business, a different kind of behavior. And when I sold my medium-sized aerospace company to a very large business, totally different behaviors on average. They've been amazing stewards of the brand. They've done a great job of the company. I'm super thrilled that it kept going, because sometimes big companies can destroy smaller companies. Yep. But the behaviors were different, more like what you were describing in the book. But there's lessons there, right?
There's huge lessons there. And I did one lucky thing. When I did sell the company eventually, they wanted me to come in, and it was a public company, and they wanted me to come in and be VP of marketing. And I thought about it, and I had, the last investor that I had in the company was quite wise. He was the one that came up with profitless prosperity, right? And he just looked at me and says, Brian, you don't have a political bone in your body. You will be sacrificed if you join that company. And it made me realize, and I managed to get to be a consultant to them for a couple of years, right? And the 2 years that I had to work with them under that consulting agreement, I saw the chronic paralysis that they would get into, where all these personalities are fighting each other to outdo each other, to rise in the ranks. And, you know, we'd go into a product development meeting and I'd be thinking of raspberry and plum and forest green and, you know, all these different colors and styles I had in my mind. And we'd come out of the meeting and the decision was we're going to do gray, because that was the least controversial color of the whole, you know. And I could just see the crippling effect of all these meetings, meeting after meeting after meeting in that environment. So I was, you know, a lot of people think, God, Brian, you must regret selling the company. Well, I don't, because it got too big. You know, I was not the person in the personality to take it into the, you know, the billions. I love the chaos and the uncertainty and the, you know, the flexibility of being an entrepreneur. And I was just so thrilled to be out of it. And by the same token, like you said with your company, the UGG company, you know, the Deckers Corporation who took it over, have done a brilliant job in shepherding the brand through all these years. And it's for the last 2 years, it's exceeded $2 billion in sales. It's hard, you know, I'm so glad I wasn't part of that.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. The unpredictable sort of chaos in the beginning. I just got this visual of you riding the unpredictable waves out there surfing, and you got perfect metaphor all the way through.
It is. There's a lot of philosophy in the book that relates to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Any big lessons while you went through the selling of the company to Deckers, you know, for you that our listeners could benefit from?
Sure. The biggest lesson, and this is not in the book, it's, you know, I don't hardly ever talk about this, but I did have all these different types of, you know, investors and hangover people. And, you know, we bought a competitor, UGHS, and they had their guy. So there was a lot of different interests in the business. And when we finally made a deal to sell it, you know, all of these interests sort of rose up. It's like mushrooms growing out of mold, you know, and you really start to see the true colors of people when the money hits the table. You know, that's one of the most powerful pieces of philosophy. You know, when the money hits the table, the true characters come out. And I saw such greed and avarice and backstabbing and, you know, for everybody trying to get more than what their share was. So that was something that I had to deal with on a personal level. And the other thing was that the new company that took it on, they also had interests that I didn't see during the sale, right? To me, it was very clean. It was a buddy of mine who started a sandal company, and he did a lot of licensing. He ended up with a Teva Sandals as a licensee, and he built that up to, you know, $60-70 million in sales during when the outdoor market took off. He rode that thing just like Nike did with jogging, right? And I knew that Doug had about, you know, $20-30 million in cash because they did an IPO around that. So I knew he had $30 million in cash. And I happened to see him when I was facing you know, we'd just come off a 15 million season and it looked like the next season was going to be 20 million. I knew I couldn't finance it. And I met him in the baggage claim in Atlanta airport. We were going to the same trade show. And I just walked up to him and said, Doug, you know, because his business died every winter. Our business died every summer. And I thought by putting them together, we could have a 12-month, Salesforce, a 12-month accounting and, back office stuff. And I walked up to him and said, listen, if ever we're going to do this, now's the time. And we did put them together. And that was like in February, and by October, the deal was done and we all walked away. But it was a very difficult period to go through that, when you start to see all these side interests come in and get involved.
Yeah. I'm working on a third book for me, and I'm contemplating putting a chapter in there titled "Money Makes People Weird."
It does.
The advantage I've always had in selling my companies, I've had exits from a few million to well into 9 figures,
right?
Is that I always had controlling interest, and so no matter what noise people made, it didn't matter.
That's
I would always do what was right, what we agreed to, no matter what, and that's benefited me. I've never kept all the businesses. I've always given equity to employees that were getting great results, but I always kept the majority of it. And when money's on the table, you're right. It just brings out what you never thought was possible.
Yeah, it's human nature. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
You just got to look out on the Serengeti plains and see a lioness bring down some sort of prey, and guess who comes in? It's the male lion comes in and swats them out of the way, and then the lioness, then the hyenas are kicking at their heels, and the crows and the birds and the vultures. I mean, it's humans. In a lot of ways so sophisticated, but the primal instincts haven't changed that much, So
that's my new metaphorical picture for selling a company worth, a decent amount of money. It's the Serengeti and all that. Everybody going for their fill. Most startup companies fail. A few make it. What's your wisdom on why that is? What advice do you have?
Anyone who does make it and becomes profitable, they've never avoided those infancy years. That they've been able to believe in their product, number one, or product or service. Belief is number one, and then having the grit to. And there's so many choices to be made. Like if you're a young married person and you just started a company and you got a baby, your decisions are a little different from being a single guy or a girl and, being able to take big risks. But the tenacity to hang in there and find solutions when all looks bleak, that to me is the mark of a good entrepreneur. And there'll be varying degrees of success, but everyone who really believes and never gives up will make it. And there's a part of philosophy in the book. When I would be faced with these situations, I had a mantra that I wrote out from a book of philosophy that I read 20 years ago, and I typed it out. And it's on a piece of paper, and every January 1st, I transfer it from my old calendar to my new daily planner, right? Because I sort of live on these things as my daily planner. So in the front of that book is this piece of paper, and it says, feast upon uncertainty, fatten upon disappointment, invigorate in the presence of difficulties, and enthuse over apparent defeat, right? And that used to be on my refrigerator for the first 5 years that I found it. And now I know it by heart, so I just transferred it into my calendar. But nothing in this world can come up that isn't solved by those 4 mantras, like feast upon uncertainty. I love uncertainty now because it brings up so many possibilities, right? Fatten upon disappointment. Well, shit, things are going to go wrong. You're going to lose a bunch of the times. As much as you win, you'll lose. But, fatten upon that, get stronger. Invigorate in the presence of difficulties. That's self-explanatory. And enthuse over apparent defeat. That's a really, really powerful mantra because defeat is not a real thing. Defeat only is real the instant you give up. You're defeated. And you can recall in my book when I had that group tried to do an end run around me from my manufacturer, and they became distributors. And I walked over to their booth at this trade show, and I saw that my manufacturer had cut me off because of a death in my group, that was a finance part, and had joined up with this new distributor. And I walked over to the trade show booth and I saw all of my product with a different logo on the back, and even then I knew, I thought, oh shit, I'm out of business. But in my mind, I wasn't defeated. I knew I was not going to survive that year, but I didn't take it on as a defeat, like it's the end. I thought maybe I can come back next year, right? And again, as you read the book, it's that incredible turn of events when, the life insurance policy I'd taken out with that partner who died was able to buy the business back from his widow. And I owned 100, even though I was absolutely broke, I owned 100% of the company again, So those 4 mantras all fit that situation where I just refused to be defeated. And as I said, the uncertainty is my favorite part of going into new businesses now.
Yeah, I'm 100% aligned with you. We there's so many lessons we could dig into for another hour each.
Easily, yeah.
And we're running up against it. The really powerful lesson for me and what you were talking about with that supplier, I've always been very direct in conversations with my competition, and it's served me incredibly well. And their reaction typically is, I can't talk to you because we're enemies. It's like, that's probably not going to serve you well, but it worked out better for me, actually having those discussions.
Yeah.
My biggest takeaway from our discussion here is just the reinforcement that it's literally all about the journey.
Yep.
And the uncertainty is where the opportunity is. Brian, what's your biggest takeaway from our discussion today?
Just the fact that I'm so impressed about your history. I wished I had done a bit more research on you, but I will after we sort of hang up here. The fact that you've been able to build, business after business is fantastic. I've had several businesses since, I just enjoy the process of figuring out a market and trying to supply it and, bring on teams and stuff like that. So the fact that you've done it so successfully, 9 figures, that's like unheard of. It's very, the number of people throw the word billion around today like it's, anyone can do it. But, even despite the fact that there's all these $1 billion valuations, they're all bullshit. But to do $1 billion in revenue, oh my God, that's the top 0.5% of the world, really.
And I figure it's hard because it's hard. Right?
Yeah.
Each one is the same process, and that's why I love your stages approach: conception, birth. It's all the same every single time. So let's go. When it comes up. So
if there was one thing that your listeners should zero in on, it's that theme, and you can't say it any better. Like the best line in my book is the most powerful piece of philosophy. It sounds so trite. We've talked about it earlier. The quickest way for a tadpole to become a frog is to live every day happily as a tadpole. And it can't be said any better than that. That's all about the journey.
Yeah. Well, Brian, thank you so much for being here today. This has been just a fantastic conversation experience for me.
Yeah, well, thank you, Lee. I really, really had fun on this one.
Okay, great. And I hope we stay in touch. And this has been the Show Your Value podcast, where we explore the art of value creation. If you got some value out of today's episode, please like and leave a review. And until next time, show your value to the world.